With her hands bound behind her back and terror coursing through her veins, Zara Williams never imagined that the Korean Mafia boss who would pay $15 million for her at an underground auction was seeing the face of his murdered girlfriend. She was supposed to be sold to the highest bidder, another victim of a trafficking ring she never knew existed, until Kim Tae-jun's dark eyes locked onto hers and everything changed. At 23, Zara Williams had been focused on her nursing degree at Portland Community College, working double shifts at a medical clinic to pay for textbooks and her grandmother's medications. She lived in a cramped apartment with her roommate Keisha, studying late into the night and dreaming of becoming a trauma nurse. Her natural hair was styled in protective braids, and despite the exhaustion that shadowed her warm brown eyes, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She had saved $3,000 toward a future that seemed just within reach, a future where she could help heal people and support her family. That future shattered 2 days ago when masked men kicked down their apartment door. Keisha owed money to the wrong people, they said. Serious money to a drug trafficking network that had decided her roommate's art student loans and part-time coffee shop job weren't generating payments fast enough. When they discovered Keisha had fled the state without telling anyone, they turned their attention to Zara. Someone had to pay the debt, they explained with cold calculation. Someone had to be sold to recoup their losses. Now she sat in the back of a windowless van, her wrists raw from plastic restraints, her mind spinning with terror and disbelief. The men spoke casually about her value, about her age, about her status as a virgin, as if she were livestock being prepared for market. Every bump in the road sent fresh waves of panic through her chest. She had heard about human trafficking on the news, had studied it in her criminology elective, but never imagined it could reach into her ordinary life and drag her into its darkness. The warehouse was a maze of concrete and shadows, filled with the kind of men who made their living from other people's suffering. Zara was led through a series of rooms where other women sat in similar terror, their eyes hollow with the recognition of what was about to happen to them. The auction room itself was arranged like a theater, with rows of chairs facing a raised platform where their lives would be sold to the highest bidder. Kim Tae-jun had come to the auction for intelligence gathering, not shopping. At 35, he was the head of the Kim family syndicate, one of 3 major Korean organizations that controlled territory from Seattle to San Francisco. His empire was built on strategic partnerships, calculated violence, and the absolute loyalty of men who knew his word was law. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's yearly salary, his dark hair perfectly styled, his sharp features revealing nothing of his thoughts. His presence commanded immediate respect from everyone in the room, even rival crime families who would kill him in other circumstances. Tae-jun's legitimate businesses included shipping, real estate, and several high-end restaurants that laundered money with pristine efficiency. But his real power came from his ability to see 3 moves ahead of his enemies, to turn their strengths into weaknesses, and to eliminate threats before they became problems. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, unreachable, and absolutely merciless when crossed. He was reviewing financial reports on his phone when they brought Zara onto the platform. The auctioneer was in the middle of describing her background, her age, her medical records, when Tae-jun's head snapped up and his blood turned to ice water. The woman standing under the harsh warehouse lights had the same heart-shaped face, the same full lips, the same defiant tilt to her chin despite her obvious terror. Her skin was a shade darker, her hair a different texture, but the bone structure was identical. She could have been Minji's sister. The memories hit him like a physical blow. Minji Park, 21 years old, a literature student at the University of Washington who had somehow fallen in love with a man whose hands were stained with blood. She had seen past his reputation to something he wasn't sure existed anymore, had believed he could be more than just a criminal empire builder. For 2 years, she had been his sanctuary, the one person who could make him feel human instead of monstrous. The Park family had murdered her 3 years ago as psychological warfare, knowing that destroying Tae-jun's heart would be more effective than attacking his businesses directly. They had taken their time, making sure her death was slow and painful, making sure he would blame himself for bringing her into his world. He had found her body in their shared apartment, along with photographs documenting her final hours and a note promising that anyone he cared about would meet the same fate. Since then, Taijun had operated with clinical detachment, building his empire with methodical precision while keeping his emotions locked away where they couldn't be used against him. He had eliminated the Park family's leadership over the course of 2 years, dismantling their organization piece by piece until nothing remained but whispered warnings about what happened to people who hurt Kim Taijun's loved ones. But now, looking at Zara Williams as she stood on that auction platform with tears streaming down her face, he felt something crack inside his chest. The resemblance was so perfect it took his breath away, and for a moment he could almost believe Minji was alive, that the last 3 years had been a nightmare he was finally waking up from. The bidding had started at 50,000 and was climbing rapidly. Zara's youth and her medical records were driving up her price, along with the certification from the doctor who had examined her. The men in the audience were discussing her like she was a prized horse, evaluating her potential for different types of work, calculating return on investment. Taijun's bodyguard leaned over to whisper something about leaving soon, about other meetings that required his attention, but Taijun wasn't listening. He was watching Zara's face, seeing the way she held herself upright despite her terror, the way she refused to look away from the crowd, even though her hands were shaking. There was strength in her that reminded him of Minji, a core of steel beneath the fear. The bidding reached 2 million and continued climbing. Zara's face had gone pale, her breathing shallow, but she still stood with her shoulders back and her chin raised. Taijun found himself studying every detail of her features, cataloging the similarities and differences. The shape of her eyes was exactly the same, the curve of her mouth, the stubborn set of her jaw. When the auctioneer called for final bids at $12 million, Taijun stood up slowly, his movement instantly drawing the attention of everyone in the warehouse. His voice cut through the excited chatter like a blade through silk. $15 million, he said, his tone making it clear that further bidding would be inadvisable. The silence that followed was absolute. 15 million was more money than most of these operations saw in 5 years of trafficking. It was the kind of bid that ended auctions and started legends. The auctioneer looked around the room, waiting for any response, but no one was foolish enough to challenge Kim Taijun when he had made his intentions clear. Sold, the auctioneer announced, his voice slightly hoarse with surprise. Taijun's men moved forward to handle the transaction, while he continued to stare at Zara, who was looking back at him with a mixture of terror and confusion. She had no idea who he was or why he had just spent $15 million to own her, but she could see the intensity in his dark eyes, the way his attention focused on her like a laser. As his bodyguards approached the platform to collect her, Taijun found himself wondering if he had just saved her life or doomed them both. The resemblance to Minji was too perfect to be coincidence, and he had learned long ago that coincidences in his world usually meant someone was trying to manipulate him. But as he watched Zara being led toward him, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but her spine still straight with dignity, he realized it didn't matter. Whether this was fate or manipulation, he wasn't letting her go. The transaction was completed with the efficiency that came from dealing with serious money and dangerous people. Zara Williams now belonged to Kim Taijun, and everyone in that warehouse understood exactly what that meant. She was under his protection, subject to his will, and completely beyond their reach. As they escorted her toward his waiting limousine, Taijun caught one last glimpse of her profile and felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. For the first time in 3 years, he was bringing a woman into his world. And this time, he promised himself, he would be ready for whatever came next. The limousine was the most expensive vehicle Zara had ever been inside, with leather seats that cost more than her entire semester's tuition and a partition that separated them from the driver with bulletproof glass. She sat as far from Kim Taijun as the space would allow, her wrists still raw from the restraints, her mind reeling from the impossibility of what had just happened. $15 million. He had paid $15 million for her like she was a piece of art or a rare gemstone. Taijun sat across from her with perfect posture, his expensive suit immaculate despite the warehouse environment they had just left. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as if he was memorizing every detail. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, carrying the kind of authority that made people listen without question. "You're safe now," he said, reaching into a compartment beside his seat to withdraw a bottle of water. The plastic seal cracked as he opened it and offered it to her. "Drink this. You're dehydrated." Zara stared at the bottle, her throat dry as sandpaper, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She was sitting in a luxury car with a man who had just purchased her at a human trafficking auction, and he was offering her water like they were at a business meeting. The surreal nature of it all made her feel like she was drowning in confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of crying. "Why did you buy me? What do you want?" Taijun leaned forward slightly, his movement careful and controlled. His presence filled the space between them without being threatening, but she could feel the power that radiated from him like heat from a fire. "My name is Kim Taijun," he said, his English perfect with only the slightest accent. "I head the Kim family operations in the Pacific Northwest. And you look exactly like someone I used to know." The way he said used to know made her stomach clench with understanding. Someone he had lost. Someone who was gone. That explained the intensity in his eyes when he had looked at her on the platform. The way his entire demeanor had shifted from casual observer to focused predator. She drank the water because her body needed it, because dehydration would only make her situation worse. The liquid was cold and clean, a sharp contrast to the metallic taste of fear that had been coating her mouth for 2 days. As they drove through the Seattle streets, she caught glimpses of the city through the tinted windows, ordinary people living ordinary lives while she sat trapped in circumstances that felt like a nightmare. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Belltown, with private elevator access that required a keycard and biometric scanner. Taijun's hands settled lightly on her lower back as they stepped into the elevator, guiding her without force, but the touch made her entire body tense. She wasn't used to being touched by men she didn't know, wasn't used to being owned by anyone. The doors opened directly into his apartment, and Zara's breath caught in her throat. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city sprawling below them, Elliott Bay stretching toward the Olympic Mountains in the distance. The furniture was a mixture of modern minimalism and traditional Korean elements, everything expensive and perfectly placed. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft hum of climate control and the distant sound of traffic far below. "This is your room," Taijun said, leading her down a hallway lined with original artwork. The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment had been, with its own bathroom and a walk-in closet already filled with clothes in her exact size. "Dr. Chun will be here in 20 minutes to examine you," he continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "You've been through trauma. You need medical attention before we discuss anything else." Zara turned to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been kidnapped, terrorized, sold like property, and now she was standing in a penthouse that cost more than she would make in 10 lifetimes. Her mind kept trying to process the impossible sequence of events, but nothing made sense. "Why would you help me?" she asked, searching his face for answers. "You don't even know me." Taijun's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "No," he said quietly, "but I knew someone who looked exactly like you. Someone who died because I couldn't protect her, and I won't make that mistake again." Dr. Chun was a small Korean woman in her 50s who carried herself with the competence of someone accustomed to asking no questions about her patients. She examined Zara thoroughly but gently, checking for signs of physical abuse, dehydration, and shock. Taijun remained in the room throughout the examination, his presence both protective and possessive, his dark eyes never leaving Zara's face. The doctor prescribed rest, proper nutrition, and time to process the trauma. She left medication for anxiety and sleeping pills for the nightmares that would inevitably come. When she was gone, Taijun guided Zara to his office, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from his desk. "We need to discuss your situation." Zara remained standing, her arms crossed over her chest. "My situation is that I was kidnapped by criminals and sold to another criminal," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I should be calling the police, not sitting in your office having a conversation." Taijun's smile was sharp and humorless. "The police can't protect you from the people who took you. The trafficking network that kidnapped you operates across multiple states with connections to international organizations. They have law enforcement contacts, judges they've bought, prosecutors they've intimidated. Filing a report would only put you back on their radar. He opened a folder on his desk and turned it toward her. Inside were photographs of Keisha's body, crime scene reports, and documentation of the drug debt that had led to her roommate's death. They killed her yesterday, Taijun said without emotion. Made it look like an overdose. They're tying up loose ends, which means you're still in danger. Zara sank into the chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Keisha was dead. Her roommate, who had been terrified of needles, who had never used anything stronger than marijuana, had allegedly died of a heroin overdose. The room spun around her as she stared at the photographs, evidence of a world where people disappeared without consequences. I saved your life tonight, Taijun continued, his voice gentle but firm. $15 million bought you freedom from that auction, but it didn't eliminate the organization that put you there. They know you exist. They know you escaped. And they will try to reclaim their property unless you're under protection they can't touch. He leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction. I'm offering you a choice, Zara. Accept my protection and live safely while you finish your education, or try to survive on your own against people who traffic in human beings for profit. But understand that if you leave here tonight, I can't guarantee you'll live to see tomorrow. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, and they both knew it. Zara stared at the photographs of her dead roommate, thinking about the men who had discussed her value like she was livestock, remembering the other women in that warehouse who hadn't been lucky enough to catch the attention of someone with $15 million to spend. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Taijun's dark eyes held hers without wavering. Your presence, he said simply. Someone I loved very much was murdered 3 years ago. She looked enough like you to be your sister. I want you to live here, safely, under my protection. I'll pay for your education, provide everything you need. In exchange, I need your loyalty and your silence about anything you see or hear in this house. Zara felt tears burning behind her eyes. You want me to be her replacement? No, Taijun said, and there was something raw in his voice that hadn't been there before. I want you to be alive. Whatever healing that brings me is secondary to keeping you safe. But I won't lie and say your resemblance to her doesn't matter. It does. She was everything good in my world, and when she died, that goodness died with her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and impossible choices. Zara looked around the expensive office, thinking about her grandmother who needed medication, her dreams of becoming a nurse, her future that had been stolen by people who saw her as nothing more than a commodity to be sold. If I stay, she said carefully, what happens if I want to leave? Then you leave, Taijun replied without hesitation. I'm not keeping you prisoner, Zara. I'm offering you protection and opportunity. But if you choose to go, you go with enough resources to disappear completely and start over somewhere they'll never find you. She studied his face, searching for deception, but found only patience and something that might have been hope. He was offering her a life that most people could only dream of, safety from dangers she couldn't fight alone, and the chance to become the nurse she had always wanted to be. The price was her independence and her moral certainty about right and wrong. I accept, she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. Taijun's smile was the first genuine emotion she had seen from him since the auction. Welcome home, Zara Williams. You're under my protection now, and I promise you that no one will hurt you again. 3 weeks after the auction, Zara Williams woke up in Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than her monthly rent used to be, in a bedroom with a view of Puget Sound that stretched uninterrupted to the horizon. The morning routine had become familiar now. Coffee delivered by Mrs. Kim, the housekeeper who spoke limited English but somehow always knew exactly how Zara preferred her breakfast, followed by 2 hours with Professor Martinez, a private tutor who was helping her stay current with her nursing program coursework. Her new life was a study in contradictions that still left her feeling unmoored. The penthouse was equipped with every luxury imaginable, from a library stocked with medical textbooks to a fitness room with equipment that rivaled the college gym. But she couldn't leave without an escort from Taijun's security team. She had access to more educational resources than she had ever dreamed of, But those resources came from money earned through activities she tried not to think about too carefully. The tutoring sessions took place in the sunroom, a glass-walled space filled with plants that Taijun had apparently ordered specifically for her comfort. Professor Martinez was a retired nursing instructor from the University of Washington who asked no questions about why a college student was living in a crime boss's penthouse and receiving private education worth more than most people's annual salaries. She simply taught with the dedication of someone who genuinely cared about Zara's academic success. Between study sessions, Zara had begun exploring the penthouse like an anthropologist studying an alien culture. The artwork was museum quality, a mixture of contemporary pieces and traditional Korean paintings that spoke to heritage and refined taste. The kitchen was a chef's dream, though Mrs. Kim made it clear that Zara was welcome to cook if she wanted to learn Korean dishes. The library contained books in 3 languages, with medical journals sitting alongside classic literature and what appeared to be strategic business texts. Taijun's presence in her daily life was carefully measured, never overwhelming but always evident. He joined her for dinner most evenings, their conversations initially awkward but gradually becoming more natural as she grew accustomed to his controlled intensity. He asked about her studies, her family, her dreams of becoming a trauma nurse. He answered her questions about his legitimate businesses with the patience of someone who understood her need to reconcile his kindness toward her with the darker realities of his empire. During their 4th week together, she finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been eating at her since the auction. "Tell me about her," Zara said over dinner, setting down her chopsticks and meeting his dark eyes directly. "The woman I look like. Tell me about Minji." Taijun's expression didn't change, but she had learned to read the subtle shifts in his body language, the way his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly when something hit too close to emotional truth. He was quiet for a long moment, considering his wine glass, before he began to speak in a voice that was carefully controlled but carried an undertone of old pain. Her name was Park Minji, and she was 21 when I met her. A literature student at the University of Washington who worked part-time in a bookstore near campus. She was everything I wasn't: optimistic, trusting, genuinely kind to everyone she met. The first time I saw her, she was arguing with a customer who was being rude to the teenage clerk, defending someone she barely knew because it was the right thing to do. He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine glass. Zara waited, sensing that interrupting would break whatever spell was allowing him to share this piece of himself. I was expanding operations then, focused on building the empire, making strategic moves against rival families. I should have stayed away from her. Someone like Minji, someone clean and innocent, had no business being anywhere near my world. But she saw something in me that I wasn't sure existed anymore. She believed I could be more than just a criminal empire builder. The pain in his voice was becoming more evident now, cracks appearing in his careful composure. Zara found herself leaning forward, drawn into the story of a woman whose face she shared. For 2 years, she was my sanctuary, the one person who could make me feel human instead of monstrous. She never asked me to change what I was, never demanded that I become someone different. She just loved me as I was while believing I could choose to be better. When I came home covered in blood from a territorial dispute, she would tend to my wounds without asking questions. When I couldn't sleep because of things I had done, she would hold me until the nightmares passed. Taijun stood up abruptly, walking to the windows that looked out over the city lights. His reflection in the glass looked older than his 35 years, weighted down by regrets and losses that money couldn't repair. The Park family decided that destroying my happiness was more effective than attacking my businesses directly. They had been losing ground to us for months, watching their territory shrink while ours expanded. Instead of declaring open war, they chose psychological warfare. They knew that hurting Minji would hurt me more than killing 100 of my soldiers. Zara's stomach clenched with anticipatory dread. She could see where this story was heading, could feel the approaching tragedy like a storm front moving across calm water. They took their time, Taijun continued, his voice becoming flatter, more controlled. 3 days. They kept her alive for 3 days, making sure her death was slow and painful, documenting everything they did to her. When I finally found her, she was in our apartment, in our bedroom. They had left photographs for me to find, pictures of her final hours, along with a note promising that anyone I cared about would meet the same fate. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of traffic far below and the soft hum of the building's climate control system. Zara felt tears burning behind her eyes, not just for Minji's suffering, but for the man standing at the window whose carefully constructed world had been shattered by senseless cruelty. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate in the face of such loss. Taijun turned back to her, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his dark eyes that she had never glimpsed before. "I spent the next 2 years systematically destroying everyone who had touched her," he said quietly. "Every member of the Park family leadership, every soldier who had participated, every person who had known what they planned and failed to stop it. I dismantled their organization piece by piece until nothing remained but whispered warnings about what happened to people who hurt Kim Taijun's loved ones." He returned to his seat across from her, his movement careful and controlled. But vengeance didn't bring her back. It didn't fill the emptiness she left behind. "For 3 years, I've operated with clinical detachment, building my empire while keeping my emotions locked away where they couldn't be used against me again. Until I saw you on that auction platform." Zara met his gaze, seeing the man beneath the Mafia boss, the human being who had loved someone enough to wage a 2-year war in her memory. "Your face is so similar to hers that for a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. But as I've gotten to know you these past weeks, I've realized something important. You're not Minji. You're Zara Williams, and you're remarkable in your own right." Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that their relationship was evolving beyond the transactional arrangement they had originally agreed to. Zara felt her heart beginning to race, not with fear, but with something more complex and dangerous. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his hand where it rested near his wine glass. The touch was tentative, questioning, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers turned to intertwine with hers, and she felt the warmth of his skin, the careful strength in his grip. "I can't replace her," Zara said softly, "and I wouldn't want to try. But I can be grateful to you for saving my life, and I can see that you're not the monster you think you are." Taijun's smile was small but genuine, the first truly unguarded expression she had seen from him. "Perhaps we can heal each other," he said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious, until it was broken by the sharp chime of Taijun's phone. He answered it with his business voice, speaking rapid Korean that Zara couldn't understand, but she could see the change in his posture, the way his free hand tightened into a fist. When he ended the call, his expression had shifted back to the controlled mask she had become familiar with, but now she could see the calculation behind it, the strategic mind assessing threats and planning responses. "What's wrong?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "We have a problem," Taijun said, standing up and walking back to the windows. "Someone has been asking questions about you, making inquiries about the Korean woman who bought a trafficking victim for $15 million. The Park family may be gone, but their allies remember what happened to them, and they're not as afraid of me as they should be." Zara felt cold dread settling in her stomach. The safe cocoon of the penthouse suddenly felt less secure, the luxury around her less protective. "Are we in danger?" she asked. "You are under my protection," Taijun replied, turning back to her with eyes that had gone cold and focused. "But yes, there is danger. There are people who would love to hurt me by taking you away, who see your resemblance to Minji as either an opportunity for revenge or a weakness they can exploit." He returned to the table, his movements controlled but purposeful. "Tomorrow, we increase security. You'll have a larger detail when you travel, and we'll be limiting your movements until we can identify who's making these inquiries and eliminate them as a threat." The word eliminate sent a shiver down Zara's spine, but she found that the prospect of Taijun using violence to protect her didn't frighten her as much as it should have. Over the past 3 weeks, she had seen his gentleness, his careful attention to her comfort and safety, his respect for her boundaries, even when he could have demanded anything he wanted from her. "Will you tell me if it gets serious?" she asked. "I don't want to be kept in the dark about threats to my own life." Taijun studied her face, perhaps seeing the steel beneath her fear, the strength that had helped her survive kidnapping and trafficking and everything that had followed. "You're stronger than Minji was," he said quietly. She was afraid of my world, afraid of the violence and the danger. But you're asking to understand it, to be prepared for it. I'm a nursing student, Zara replied. I've seen what violence does to people, how quickly everything can change. I'd rather face the truth than live in comfortable ignorance. Then yes, he promised. I'll tell you if it gets serious. But right now, you're safe. This building is a fortress. My people are loyal, and anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first. As they finished dinner and prepared for the evening, Zara found herself studying Taijun's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the controlled grace of his movements. 3 weeks ago, she had been terrified of him, seeing only the criminal who had purchased her at an auction. Now she was beginning to understand that he was a man who had loved deeply and lost everything, who had built walls around his heart that were only now beginning to crack. When she went to bed that night, her dreams were filled with images of a young woman who looked like her, whose love had been pure enough to see past blood and violence to the man underneath. And for the first time since the auction, Zara found herself wondering what it would be like to love someone dangerous, someone whose protection came with a price that might be higher than she was prepared to pay. Outside the penthouse windows, the city slept unaware that somewhere in its shadows, people were planning violence against a woman whose only crime had been resembling someone who had died 3 years ago. But inside the fortress of glass and steel, Zara Williams slept peacefully under the protection of a man who would kill or die to keep her safe. The shift in their relationship was subtle at first, manifesting in stolen glances across the dinner table and the way Taijun's fingers would linger when he handed her a book or helped her with her coat. Zara found herself hyper-aware of his presence in ways that both thrilled and terrified her, noticing the way his expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him, the careful grace of his movements, the rare moments when his controlled mask slipped to reveal genuine warmth. During their 5th week together, she caught him watching her as she studied in the library, his dark eyes soft with an expression that had nothing to do with grief over a dead woman and everything to do with the living, breathing person she was becoming under his protection. When their eyes met, neither of them looked away immediately, and Zara felt heat bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with attraction she wasn't sure she had the right to feel. The moral complexity of her situation kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her luxurious bedroom while her mind churned through impossible questions. How could she be falling for a man who had purchased her like property? What did it say about her that she was attracted to someone whose hands were stained with blood, whose empire was built on violence and fear? Was her growing affection genuine, or was it some kind of psychological response to trauma, her mind creating attachment to her protector as a survival mechanism? But then she would remember the gentleness in Taijun's voice when he spoke about his plans for her education, the way he had held her hand while she cried about Keisha's death, the careful respect he showed for her boundaries even when she could see desire flickering in his dark eyes. Whatever her feelings were, they felt real and complicated and entirely outside her previous experience of attraction. Taijun was struggling with his own emotional confusion, though he hid it behind the same controlled composure he brought to business negotiations and territorial disputes. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that his heart was too damaged to love again, that the emptiness left by Minji's death was permanent and perhaps necessary to keep him focused on building his empire and protecting what remained of his world. But Zara was proving him wrong with every passing day. Her laugh was different from Minji's, more musical and less reserved. Her intelligence was sharper, more analytical, shaped by her medical studies and her determination to heal people rather than simply exist in peaceful ignorance of the world's cruelties. Her strength was more evident, forged by surviving kidnapping and trafficking and choosing to trust him despite every rational reason to run. The morning everything changed started like any other, with Zara settled in the sunroom for her tutoring session with Professor Martinez, while Taijun attended to business calls in his office. The security detail was lighter than usual because 2 of his regular bodyguards were investigating the source of the inquiries about Zara, leaving only Jean and Marcus positioned discreetly around the penthouse. Professor Martinez had brought new medical journals focusing on trauma surgery, and Zara was absorbed in an article about emergency procedures when she heard raised voices from the hallway. Not the normal sounds of Tai-jun conducting business, but something sharper, more urgent. She looked up from her textbook to see Professor Martinez's face had gone pale, her experienced eyes recognizing the difference between routine security and genuine alarm. "Stay here," Professor Martinez whispered, but Zara was already standing, her nursing instincts kicking in. If someone was hurt, if there was a medical emergency, she needed to help. The sound of gunfire exploded through the penthouse like thunder, followed by shouting in Korean and English. Zara's blood turned to ice as her mind processed what was happening. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was an attack, the kind of violence Tai-jun had warned her about. The danger she had known was always lurking at the edges of their carefully constructed safety. Jean appeared in the doorway of the sunroom, his suit jacket torn and blood seeping from a cut on his forehead. "Miss Williams," he said urgently, "we need to get you to the safe room now." But before Zara could respond, the windows behind her exploded inward in a shower of glass and rappelling equipment. 3 men in tactical gear swung through the opening with military precision, their faces covered by black masks, their weapons trained on her with deadly focus. Professor Martinez screamed and dropped to the floor, covering her head with her hands. Jean was reaching for his weapon when the first man fired, a dart that hit him in the neck and sent him crashing to the ground within seconds. Not bullets, Zara realized with clinical detachment. Tranquilizer darts. They wanted to take her alive. The lead attacker moved toward her with predatory confidence, speaking accented English through his mask. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice carrying satisfaction and cruelty in equal measure. "You're going to come with us very quietly, or the old woman dies first, and then we take you anyway." Zara's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her mind was strangely clear. These men had come prepared for Tai-jun's security, had planned this operation with the kind of precision that suggested serious backing and extensive intelligence. They knew her name, knew her routine, knew exactly when the security would be lightest. She backed against the wall, her hands raised in a gesture of submission while her eyes searched for anything she could use as a weapon. The medical textbooks were too light, but there was a heavy glass paperweight on the nearby shelf, and if she could reach it without them noticing. "You're making a mistake," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Kim Tai-jun will hunt you down. He'll destroy everyone you've ever cared about. You know what happened to the Park family?" The leader laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "The Park family was weak," he replied. "We are not. And Kim Tai-jun is about to learn that his protection isn't as absolute as he thinks." More gunfire echoed from other parts of the penthouse, followed by sounds that might have been doors splintering and furniture being overturned. Zara prayed that Tai-jun was safe, that his security was holding, that this nightmare would end before anyone else got hurt. The second attacker moved toward Professor Martinez, who was still cowering on the floor. "We don't have time for conversation," he said to his leader. "Grab the woman and let's go." That was when Zara lunged for the paperweight, her fingers closing around the heavy glass just as the leader reached for her. She swung it with all her strength, catching him across the temple and sending him staggering backward with a grunt of pain and surprise. The other 2 men responded instantly, raising their dart guns, but Zara was already moving, using her momentum to dive behind the heavy oak desk where Professor Martinez kept her teaching materials. The darts embedded themselves in the wood with soft thunking sounds, missing her by inches. "Bitch," the wounded leader snarled, blood streaming from the gash on his head. "Forget the darts. We'll carry her unconscious." The sound of automatic weapons fire suddenly erupted from the hallway, much closer than before, followed by shouting in Korean that Zara recognized as Tai-jun's voice. He was alive, he was fighting, and he was getting closer. The attackers heard it too, their body language shifting from confident to urgent. The leader barked orders in what sounded like Russian, and all 3 men moved toward Zara's hiding place with weapons drawn. But before they could reach her, the door to the sunroom exploded inward and Tai-jun appeared like an avenging angel, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, a military-grade rifle in his hands, his dark eyes containing a fury that was absolutely terrifying to witness. Behind him came Marcus and 2 other security personnel, moving with the coordinated precision of men who had trained for exactly this scenario. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds, but to Zara it felt like hours. She pressed herself against the floor behind the desk, her hands covering her ears, while the room filled with the deafening sound of gunfire and shouting voices and the crash of breaking furniture. When the silence finally came, it was so profound that Zara's ears rang in the aftermath. She heard footsteps, heard Taijun's voice calling her name, heard the sound of bodies hitting the floor and weapons being secured. Zara, Taijun's voice was rough with emotion and adrenaline. Are you hurt? Talk to me. She raised her head cautiously, seeing Taijun kneeling beside the desk with his rifle lowered, his face streaked with blood and his dark eyes wild with concern. Behind him, the three attackers lay motionless on the floor, their tactical gear no match for superior firepower and the fury of a man protecting what belonged to him. I'm okay, she whispered, her voice shaking despite her efforts to control it. Professor Martinez, is she? She's unconscious, but breathing, Marcus reported from across the room. Looks like shock, not injury. Taijun helped Zara to her feet, his hands gentle despite the violence that had just filled the room. His touch was careful, reverent, as if he was confirming that she was real and whole and safe. When she swayed slightly, he caught her against his chest, and she could feel his heart hammering as hard as hers. I thought I'd lost you, he said against her hair, his voice raw with emotion he wasn't trying to hide anymore. When I heard the gunfire from this room, when I thought they had taken you. The words broke something open in Zara's chest, some barrier she had been maintaining between gratitude and something deeper. She pulled back to look at his face, seeing the man beneath the Mafia boss, the human being who had just fought through armed attackers to reach her. You came for me, she said, wonder and realization mixing in her voice. Always, Taijun replied, his dark eyes holding hers with absolute certainty. I will always come for you, Zara Williams. You are mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to keep safe from anyone who would hurt you. The possession in his voice should have frightened her, should have reminded her of the circumstances that had brought them together, but instead it sent heat racing through her veins. This wasn't the cold transaction of the auction or the careful politeness of their early weeks together. This was raw emotion and desperate need and the recognition that something precious had almost been lost. I'm falling for you, she whispered, the confession torn from her by adrenaline and truth, and the way he was looking at her like she was the most important thing in his world. I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated and wrong and probably stupid, but I can't help it. Taijun's smile was fierce and triumphant and filled with an emotion that transformed his entire face. It's not wrong, he said, his hands framing her face with careful reverence. And it's not about Minji anymore. It hasn't been for weeks. You're not her replacement, Zara. You're the woman I'm falling in love with, the future I want to build, the reason I want to be more than just a man who solves problems with violence. When he kissed her, it was with the desperation of someone who had almost lost everything, the passion of a man who had rediscovered his capacity for love, the possession of someone who would burn the world down before letting anyone take her away again. Zara kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his torn shirt, her heart finally accepting what her mind had been fighting for weeks. You're mine, Taijun breathed against her lips when they broke apart. Not because I bought you, not because you owe me anything, but because you choose to be, because we choose each other. And you're mine, Zara replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Broken pieces and all, dangerous world and all. I choose you too, Kim Taijun. As the security team finished securing the scene and Marcus coordinated with the cleanup crew who would arrive within the hour, Zara stayed in Taijun's arms, finally understanding that love wasn't always safe or simple or morally uncomplicated. Sometimes it was finding someone who would fight through hell to protect you, someone who saw value in you that transcended circumstance and transaction. The three attackers would be identified as members of a Bratva with connections to the remnants of Park family allies, men who had thought Taijun's reputation for vengeance was exaggerated and had learned too late that some legends were built on absolute truth. But that was business for tomorrow. Tonight was about recognizing that they had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting, something worth building a future around despite all the violence and danger that surrounded them. The war room in Taijun's penthouse was a space Zara had never seen before, hidden behind what appeared to be a bookshelf. but was actually a reinforced steel door. Inside, multiple screens showed surveillance feeds from across the city, detailed maps marked with locations and movement patterns, and photographs of men whose faces carried the kind of hard cruelty that made her stomach clench with recognition. Taijun stood at the center of it all, like a general planning a campaign. His torn suit replaced by tactical clothing, his careful composure transformed into something colder and more focused. The attack had stripped away his civilized veneer, revealing the predator underneath, the man who had built an empire through strategic violence and absolute ruthlessness. The Volkov Bratva has been operating in our territory for 6 months, he explained to his lieutenants, his voice carrying no emotion despite the blood still drying on his knuckles. They've been testing our responses, probing for weaknesses, building intelligence about our operations. Today's attack wasn't opportunistic. It was the opening move in a larger campaign. Zara sat in a chair against the wall, feeling like an observer in a world she was only beginning to understand. She watched Taijun coordinate with men whose loyalty was absolute, whose respect for him was evident in every word and gesture. This was his true element, she realized. Not the polite dinner conversations or the careful courtship, but this calculated orchestration of violence in service of protection. Marcus spread photographs across the conference table, images taken from the dead attackers' phones and identification documents. Dmitry Volkov is the cell leader, he reported. Based in Vancouver, but with operations extending into Seattle and Portland. Intelligence suggests they're backed by remnants of Park family money, looking for revenge through proxy warfare. Taijun studied the photographs with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining X-rays. How many active soldiers? He asked. 15 confirmed, maybe 20 total. They have safe houses in 3 locations, legitimate front businesses, and at least 2 corrupt law enforcement contacts. The planning took 4 hours, with Taijun's people providing intelligence updates, tactical assessments, and logistical coordination. Zara listened to them discuss elimination strategies with the same professional thoroughness she had seen applied to business investments, understanding that this was how Taijun's world worked when diplomacy failed and protection required permanent solutions. When the meeting ended and his lieutenants dispersed to their assigned tasks, Taijun turned to Zara with an expression that was both tender and implacable. I need you to go to the safe house, he said quietly. This will take 48 hours, possibly more. You'll be protected by my best people, but you cannot be here while we handle this. Zara stood up, meeting his dark eyes directly. You're going to kill them all, aren't you? Yes, Taijun replied without hesitation. Every single person who knew about today's operation, who participated in planning it, who provided support or intelligence or resources. I'm going to eliminate the entire cell and send a message that will reach every organization from Vancouver to Los Angeles about what happens when someone threatens what belongs to me. The word eliminate should have horrified her, should have reminded her that she was in love with a man whose solutions to problems involved systematic murder. Instead, Zara felt something settle in her chest, a recognition that this violence wasn't random or cruel, but purposeful and protective. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. Come back to me, she said simply. Taijun's smile was fierce and certain. Always, he promised. The safe house was a luxury apartment in a building owned by one of Taijun's shell companies, protected by security that was both invisible and absolute. Zara spent the next 2 days in a strange state of suspended animation, unable to focus on her medical textbooks, unable to sleep properly, her mind constantly cycling through worry and anticipation and the growing certainty that her life had been permanently divided into before and after the moment she chose to love a dangerous man. She trusted him completely, which surprised her. Despite knowing that he was currently orchestrating the deaths of multiple people, despite understanding that his hands would be stained with fresh blood when he returned to her, she never doubted that he would survive and come back. Kim Taijun was a force of nature when protecting what he loved, and she was what he loved now. The call came at dawn on the 3rd day. It's done, Marcus said simply. He's on his way to you. When Taijun arrived an hour later, he looked like a man returning from war. His clothes were different, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his dark eyes carried satisfaction and finality. He moved carefully, as if his body was remembering violence. but his smile when he saw her was pure relief and homecoming. Zara ran to him without hesitation, throwing her arms around his neck and holding him tightly enough to convince herself that he was real and whole and back where he belonged. He smelled like expensive soap and something metallic she chose not to identify, but underneath it all was the scent that was uniquely him, the one that meant safety and protection and love. "Is it over?" she asked against his neck. "Completely," Taijun replied, his arms tightening around her waist. "The Volkov cell no longer exists. Their safe houses have been eliminated, their financial resources seized, their leadership dead or disappeared. Word is already spreading through the underworld about what happened to them. No one will make this mistake again." She pulled back to look at his face, seeing the exhaustion and the satisfaction and something else that looked like peace. "You're not the same man who left here 3 days ago," she observed. "No," he agreed. "I'm a man who has permanently secured the safety of the woman he loves. I'm a man who no longer has to look over his shoulder or sleep with weapons within reach because the threats have been eliminated." Taijun took her hands in his expression becoming serious and formal. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute commitment. "I want you to be my wife. Not my protected ward, not my arrangement, but my equal partner in everything I build from this moment forward." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a ring box, opening it to reveal a diamond that caught the morning light and threw it back in brilliant fragments. "I want to give you everything I have, everything I am, everything I can build. I want your name beside mine on legal documents and business partnerships. I want to wake up beside you for the rest of my life knowing that you chose me not because you had no other options, but because you wanted to." Zara stared at the ring, then at his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the formal proposal. This was Kim Taijun offering her not just marriage, but true partnership, not just protection, but equality in his empire. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong and certain. "Yes to all of it. The ring, the marriage, the partnership, the future we'll build together. Yes to loving you despite the danger, because of your protection, regardless of how we started. Yes, Kim Taijun." When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt like a claiming and a promise and a new beginning all at once. The diamond was beautiful, but what mattered was what it represented. A love that had survived trafficking and violence and moral complexity. A partnership between equals who had chosen each other freely despite impossible circumstances. As they stood together in the safe house with the morning sun streaming through bulletproof windows, Zara understood that she had found something most people only dreamed of. Not just love, but love with someone who would move heaven and earth to protect it, someone whose devotion was backed by unlimited resources and absolute determination. The threats were eliminated, the future was secured, and Kim Taijun's empire now included one more precious thing that no one would ever be allowed to touch. 6 months later, Zara Williams stood in front of a full-length mirror in the bridal suite of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. The custom wedding dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace that cost more than her entire college education had. But what transformed her appearance wasn't the expensive fabric or the professional makeup. It was the confidence in her posture, the peace in her dark eyes, the way she carried herself like someone who belonged in a world of luxury and power. The contrast to that terrified girl on the auction platform was so complete it felt like examining the life of a stranger. 6 months ago, she had been merchandise being sold to the highest bidder, a victim with no control over her fate and no hope for the future. Today, she was Dr. Zara Williams, having completed her nursing degree through accelerated private tutoring. And in 2 hours, she would become Mrs. Kim Taijun, equal partner in an empire that now included legitimate businesses, charitable foundations, and a growing network of anti-trafficking operations. Mrs. Kim knocked softly and entered with a small velvet box containing the pearl earrings that had belonged to Taijun's grandmother, a family heirloom that served as her something borrowed and a symbol of acceptance into the Kim family legacy. The older woman's English had improved significantly over the months, but her warm smile needed no translation as she helped secure the earrings with gentle, careful hands. "Ready, Mrs. Kim?" she asked, using the formal address they had both grown comfortable with. "Ready," Zara replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. The wedding ceremony itself was a blend of Korean traditions and personal touches that reflected their unique journey together. The venue was the penthouse's private rooftop garden, transformed by florists into something that resembled a fairy tale, with white roses and cherry blossoms creating an archway that framed the city skyline beyond. The guest list was small but significant. Taejun's closest associates, Professor Martinez, who had become like a mentor, and Zara's grandmother, who had flown in from Portland with tears of joy and barely concealed amazement at her granddaughter's transformation. Taejun waited at the altar wearing traditional Korean formal, where that emphasized his heritage while acknowledging the new chapter they were beginning together. When their eyes met across the garden, Zara saw the same man who had paid $15 million to save her life, but also someone who had grown and changed in the months since. The controlled mask was still there when he needed it for business, but with her it had been replaced by genuine warmth and unguarded affection. The vows they exchanged were personal and specific, acknowledging the unconventional beginning of their relationship while promising a future built on choice rather than circumstance. Taejun promised to protect her not as property, but as an equal partner, to share his world completely while respecting her independence, to build something together that honored both their pasts and their hopes for the future. Zara promised to stand beside him in the dangerous world he inhabited, to be his sanctuary and his strength, to help him transform his empire into something that protected others the way he had protected her. When she slipped the platinum band onto his finger, she was claiming him as much as he had ever claimed her, marking him as hers with the same fierce possessiveness he had shown from the beginning. The reception was intimate and elegant, but what Zara would remember most clearly was the moment when Taejun pulled her aside during the dancing to show her the legal documents that had been finalized that morning. The Minji Foundation, established with a $50 million endowment, dedicated to identifying and shutting down human trafficking operations across the Pacific Northwest. Her signature was already on the paperwork as co-director and primary medical consultant. "This is what we build together," he said, his hand warm against her back as they stood overlooking the city that had become their kingdom. "Your medical knowledge, my resources, our shared commitment to ensuring no other woman goes through what you experienced." Zara studied the documents, seeing detailed plans for safe houses, medical facilities, legal assistance programs, and coordination with law enforcement agencies that had been carefully vetted for integrity. It was a comprehensive operation that would save hundreds of lives, funded by money that had once been earned through violence, but was now being transformed into protection and healing. "You're giving me purpose beyond just being your wife," she said, understanding the full scope of what he was offering. "You're giving me purpose beyond just building wealth and eliminating enemies," Taejun replied. "Together, we can create something that makes both our lives meaningful." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Zara found herself standing in the same spot where Taejun had first told her about Minji's death, where they had shared their first moment of genuine connection. The rooftop garden was quiet now, lit by string lights and the glow of the city below, but the memories of that earlier conversation felt like they belonged to different people. "Do you think she would approve?" Zara asked quietly, thinking about the young woman whose murder had shaped so much of their story. Taejun was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think Minji would be proud that her death led to something that protects other women. I think she would understand that love isn't diminished by finding it twice, and that building a future together doesn't dishonor the past we've both survived." He turned to face Zara fully, his hands settling on her waist with the familiar, careful reverence that still made her heart race. "But more importantly, I know that this is our life now, our choice, our future. What we have isn't built on replacing someone or escaping something. It's built on choosing each other every day despite all the reasons we could have walked away." When they returned to the penthouse that night, now officially husband and wife, Zara walked through rooms that had become truly home rather than simply safe harbor. The space held memories now. Their first dinner conversation, the attack that had nearly torn them apart, quiet evenings studying while he worked nearby, mornings when she woke to find him watching her sleep with an expression of wonder that never seemed to fade. The final document signing took place in Taejun's office, now legally their office, where Zara added her signature to business partnerships, foundation documents, and property deeds that made their equality official in ways that went far beyond romantic gestures. Mrs. Zara Kim now owned half of everything, could make decisions about their shared empire, and had the legal authority to continue their work regardless of what might happen to him. As they prepared for bed in the master suite they now shared completely, Zara caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and paused to really examine the woman looking back at her. 6 months ago, she had been a terrified kidnapping victim with no choices and no power. Tonight, she was the co-director of a $50 million foundation, equal partner in a criminal empire that was transforming into something legitimate and meaningful, and wife to a man who would destroy anyone who threatened her safety. The transformation was complete, but it felt earned rather than given. She had chosen to trust Taijun despite every rational reason to fear him. She had chosen to see past his criminal activities to the man who used violence only in service of protection. She had chosen to build a life with him that honored both their capabilities and their commitment to something larger than themselves. When Taijun joined her in bed that night, pulling her close with arms that were strong enough to kill, but gentle enough to hold her like precious treasure, Zara understood that fairy tales didn't always look like the stories she had grown up reading. Sometimes they looked like finding someone who would pay $15 million to save your life, then spend the rest of his own life proving that love could transform even the darkest empire into something beautiful and meaningful and worth building together. The city slept peacefully below them, unaware that in the penthouse high above, two people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances were now creating something that would protect others from ever experiencing the same terror and helplessness. The threats were eliminated, the future was secured, and their love had become the foundation for everything they would build in the years to come.